Hello, my name is James Waddell and I am the head of European Gas and Global LNG at Energy Aspects. I'd like to thank JPX for the opportunity to give our views on the market for the coming months and the coming years. I will be going through some of our views on the European gas market as well as the global LNG market. We obviously understand the fact that the European market and the LNG market are very closely interlinked, and hopefully this will be insightful for the participants of the JPX. So I want to start with talking about the dominant view in the market, and that is that very soon, because we have a lot of LNG coming, prices will fall, might even collapse. We might even get into an oversupplied market. And the main view that we have at Energy Aspects is that the price drop will take longer than most in the market expect. And this is on a combination of demand growth across Asia, the difficulty of building up storage over the balance of this year, as well as delays in liquefaction facilities coming online. So we're not going to get quite as much LNG as most people are expecting for either the rest of this year, 2026, even 2027. So I'll start off by talking about the European gas market, which really sets the tone for the global price direction. And what we can see is that obviously we're out of the extreme price spikes that we've had over 2021 and 2022. But when you look at the price forecast that we have for the balance of 2025 and into 2026, it's not getting back to the historic levels of European gas prices, which were really sub $10. We're looking at prices in a range of $10 to $15 and really towards the higher part of that range over the next couple of years. And it's not really until we get into mid-2027, 2028, that the market starts to materially loosen. And even at that stage, even given the amount of LNG that's coming online, we don't expect to see the shut-in of large volumes of US LNG like we saw in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. Now, there will be a lot of volatility along the way, and that's large part driven by TTF prices being very dependent on the amount of LNG coming into Europe. Now, TTF has really become a global balancing price. It's not just setting the price for the market in Europe, but it's also setting the price for spot LNG across Asia, including the JKM. And that means that whatever happens to the TTF will also happen in terms of price direction on the JKM. And small changes in the Asian balance will have a very direct impact on the TTF. We've got to remember that LNG will be about 38 to 46% of European supply going forward. It used to be about 12% of the European supply mix. So LNG is much more significant for price formation at the TTF. If we look at where we think prices should be relative to where the curve is trading, we think that TTF prices should be near the top of the coal gas fuel switching channel in Europe. That is still the most elastic part of the demand curve within Europe. And that is a lot higher than where you can see current forward prices. We have been seeing those forward prices coming up over recent days, but not quite to the level we think is necessary. And the reason we think prices should be high is, firstly, we need to minimize the use of gas in the Western European power sector. And secondly, we need to minimize the amount of LNG growth across Asia in order to replenish our stocks over the course of this year. Now, a large part of why we think the market will remain tight is driven by the fact that we don't think Russian gas is coming back over the course of this year. In fact, we don't think that Russian pipeline gas is coming back into the European market at all over the next few years. There are a lot of political constraints on this happening, namely a lot of the European markets where you would expect to get that Russian gas back in remain heavily politically opposed to any Russian gas flows. That includes through the Baltics, through Poland, through Germany. Turk Stream is a possibility, but that's already near its capacity, and Ukraine remains very politically opposed to that Russian gas coming back. And not only is there a political opposition, but also legally. When we think about the number of European utilities that have been awarded damages for the non-delivery of Russian gas, if you do start flowing that Russian gas back into Europe, then the outgoing payments to Gazprom could be seized as damages. And adding to all of that, you've got the European Commission, which on the 6th of May put forward its roadmap for exiting Russian gas, which means no more spot imports of Russian gas by the end of 2025, and no more gas in total going into the European market. That's including LNG by the end of 2027. And we'll wait to see what happens in June as to how they determine how they do that. So without that Russian gas, the market is looking tight. That's even with demand being weak across Europe. That's even with the loss of large parts of the chemical sector, the refining sector in terms of gas consumers across Europe. That's even with households still constraining their own demand for gas. And then we look at the LNG imports into Europe, and we think those high prices are required to attract most of the incremental LNG that we're expecting to see over the balance of this year. We think that Europe will be reversing most of the loss of LNG that it had last year and getting back closer to 2023 levels of LNG imports. Now, none of this is going to be a problem in terms of Europe absorbing that supply because we've built out a lot of regas capacity across Europe. So the congestion issues that led to a massive price disconnect between the TTF and LNG prices both in Asia and in Europe is very unlikely to reoccur over the next couple of years. We're looking at the potential spread between DES prices for delivery to Europe and pipeline prices being well below $1, whereas at times in 2022 they were up at $15. Now moving on to the LNG market, and JKM obviously trades as a basis to the TTF, and what we see historically is that the JKM will have enough of a premium to the TTF to encourage US cargoes to divert to Asia via the Panama Canal. In times of low Asian demand, and this is 1 year of fairly low Asian demand, you can get down to the West Africa differential, where you're just trying to persuade cargoes out of Nigeria and Cameroon and Angola to go to East of Suez markets. But the long run for Asia is going to be strong demand growth across Asia, strong supply growth in the US, and most of the time the US freight differential via Panama will be setting the price for JKM TTF spreads. In terms of the import picture, we're looking at moving to a period where we have enough supply growing that both Asia and Europe can grow simultaneously. We still expect China to be leading most of that growth, driven by structural demand increases. We've got to remember that GDP is still growing. You can dispute whether that's 4% or 4.5% or even 5%, but there is structural demand growth in China, pipeline grid expansion, but also even just to drive the transition and the renewable additions in China. You're looking at large gas demand for constructing steel pylons for taking power supply across the country, or for the glass industry for making PVs. So there is a lot of structural demand growth in China over the midterm, and there is grid expansion. And the same is true for India. And I want to end off by talking about the supply wave. Yes, there is a lot of LNG coming, but if we look to the last supply wave, we can see months and months of delays on many projects. And if we look at the next supply wave in terms of the officially declared start dates, there is a lot that appears to be coming online in 2026 and 2027. But when we think about how likely these are to be delayed, we're probably going to get much more smoothing out and much more of that supply moving to the right of this chart. And we've been developing our own construction curves lately, and that has shown that the Qatari expansion is not likely to come online until the middle of next summer, with the Northfield East project starting up. And when we're thinking about Northfield South, that's probably online for 2028. So we're looking at delays just on those projects, but if we look at the delays on US projects as well, we will be shifting more of that supply to later in the decade. And every time we shift any of that supply by 3 to 6 months, that gives the global market enough time to absorb that supply and keep everything a little bit tighter than most people expect. So with that, I'd like to end this presentation and thank you all for your attention on our views on the gas market.